be aware of us, the One Group, and what we do, but we are a specialist recruitment organisation, and we put on a lot of events over the course of the last couple of years to offer value add into the marketplace, and a lot of this is geared around some topics that you want. So we've all been hit by this huge change in our social behaviours, our professional behaviours, and lots going on at the moment that we're having to adjust to. So what we want to do is to continue to put some valuable content together that really answers some of the questions and offer some solutions to you guys out in the marketplace. This is the most important thing of today. So this isn't about me doing any pitch on the great divisions that we recruit through. Recruitment's not happening at the moment, generally as a whole, but we do want to be able to put some platform together here that you can get value adds. That's the most important thing about today. It's about you and not us. So what I will do, I will introduce you over now to the speakers for today. So really proud to be partnering with Mills Reeve again. So we had the last time we partnered together would have been on an IR35 event back in the days when we could actually meet each other, have a coffee and have an actual face-to-face event. It was beautiful, and it was only probably about 6 years ago. So those were the good old days, and we'll get back there soon, I'm sure. So I'd just like to introduce David Mills and James Kidd, both partners over at Mills and Reeve and employment specialists. They're going to be going through the content today and sort of dovetailing through much of it. If you do have some questions, feel free to use the chat box. We can't guarantee that we'll get all the answers done because we want this to be as slick as possible. So, and then right at the end, it'll be an hour long today. We'll just close off and then we'll conclude. So I'm just going to hand you over to David.
Mark, thank you.
So I hope you get lots from today.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I mean, that seems like a lifetime ago, IR35 back in February. Let me introduce you to my fellow employment partner, as Mark says, James Kidd. Would you like to say hello?
Morning, everyone.
So we are looking today at two topics, furlough leave and also changing terms and conditions. Furlough leave came in on the 20th of March. The government then published some guidance. We've had two iterations since then. Actually, indeed, just this weekend, we had the third version, which came out. So today, very good timing indeed. For today's purposes, we are assuming that you all have a basic understanding of furlough, but actually quite interested to know, and I suspect many of you placed people on furlough already and actually implemented some changes. Perhaps we could, Mark, go to our first poll. We'd just like to get a show of virtual hands, really, as to, number one, who's already placed employees on furlough, yes or no? If people want to actually just click on that, we should be able to get some results up soon. That's the first question. Can we move on to the second question? Second question is who's made changes to the terms and conditions, and by that what I'm looking at is, I suspect many of you have already had to unfortunately look at reducing hours and also reducing pay. So can we have the results of that poll? So I don't, Mark, if you can get them on screen. Oh, so there we go. So 51% of you, which is high, have actually already had to place people on furlough, not completely unexpected. And then secondly, who's had to make changes to terms and conditions? A smaller amount, but still quite significant, still 22%. So thank you for that. As Mark said, we've shaped today around actually the questions that you all helpfully send in advance. So thank you for that. We've got a huge amount to get through. James is going to just start with a quick recap of the scheme, but actually what we want to concentrate on are the key issues here, okay? There are lots of areas still open to interpretation, and actually quite a few areas which haven't been addressed at all by the guidance. So for example, annual leave. We've got in the background, everybody should be able to see some slides. We'll work through those slides. As Mark said, we'll try and take some of your questions as we go. I don't think actually that we'll get through all of the slides today. We've had so many questions, but if that's the case, then what we'll do is we'll schedule another webinar in another week or so. We're actually expecting more guidance later this week. As you know, it is a moving issue. The guidance keeps being updated and we have lots of questions to be answered. So that's by way of introduction. So without any further ado, James, would you just like to set the scene and say who's the scheme open to, which employers and which employees are eligible?
Thank you, David. Okay, so back when the Chancellor was announcing the scheme, and doesn't that seem like a long time ago, everyone, he was doing that deliberately towards the end of March in the hope that many employers wouldn't make employees redundant and put them on, and they were going to have the scheme backdated to the 1st of March. So it's a 3-month scheme. So to be able to recover under the scheme, it is not a loan, it is a grant. You are able to go back to the 1st of March. It's not when the date an employee is placed on furlough or signs a furlough letter, or indeed you impose it. We'll come back to that later. It is the date when they cease working, and you can go back to the 1st of March. Now, for those of you who follow Martin Lewis, David will pull a funny face at this point because he's not a fan, but Martin Lewis is of the view that he's a money-saving expert guy. He's of the view that we're not going to go beyond the end of May. This will be a 3-month scheme. I think that actually, if we're all still in lockdown at that point, that could be quite interesting, and there'll be huge pressure on the government to continue the furlough scheme at that point. Martin Lewis also says that he doesn't think there'll be much in the way of other major changes, such as, and we'll come on to this, it doesn't pick up employees hired after the 28th of February, and it doesn't pick up if employees request to be put on furlough and the employer refuses, because that is a voluntary option for the employer. All right, let's just get back into this. So if you're a UK employer, private sector doesn't really cover public sector, then you're eligible to put employees on furlough should you choose to do so. We'll look at in detail actually how much is paid out when we get to a couple of slides later on, but the headline is 80% of normal wage costs capped at $2.5 grand. So if you earn less than 37,500, I'll come to why that figure is relevant later, then you'll get to a position where you're getting less than 2.5K. But if you earn more than 37.5K, your salary under the furlough scheme is capped at 80%, which is 30K a year. Just a word on the spirit of the scheme. So the spirit of the scheme was to help employers whose businesses are severely affected by the virus. There's been some speculation that big business shouldn't be protecting its profits by putting people on furlough when otherwise they've got bits of the business that they continue to trade. I think that at the moment the scheme is open to all. So if you are severely affected, you can apply and get the money through the scheme, and the government isn't trying to make a difference between the good guys and the people who would otherwise go out of business, such as the cafes and the pubs. Whether there will be greater scrutiny later, I doubt it. In the whole round of things, if you look at it and say the government is pushing this money out, is the HMRC going to then spend a huge amount of money when we come out of lockdown and come out of the furlough scheme to then scrutinise? I'm not convinced by that. Unless they've got cheap software which can analyse this and detect fraud, I think they will potentially just move on. Originally, the scheme, as I say, was designed to just pick up those employees who were unable to continue to work because basically you would otherwise make them redundant. It's been widened considerably over the last 2 versions of the guidance, and it's much wider than that. Pretty much most employees, and we'll come to specifics later, can be furloughed, which is quite interesting. Last point before I hand over to David is that according to the slide, as you can see, Resolution Foundation estimates 9 million workers will be furloughed. I heard a couple of weeks ago this was 4 times more popular than we expected, 4 times more popular. So, hey, you know, there's a lot of people that need this. Okay, so David, how do you make a claim and when are the payments likely to be received?
Yeah, so thank you, James. So we had a lot of questions in about this. It's going to be this online portal that you go on to claim. There were rumours it's going to be open about 2 weeks ago. I'm slightly sceptical. We are told it's now going to be open on the 20th of April, so that's next Monday. Whenever we've had portals like this before, because of the volume of people actually going in, they do tend to crash. Fingers crossed that won't actually happen. Do have a look at the guidance. There's a huge amount of information that you actually have to apply this week. You're probably going to have to start also working out things such as how much it is that you're going to pay, as James said. So this can actually go through your payroll. So to look at the guidance this week, if you're going to apply next week, get that list of information ready so you're up and ready to go. The golden question is when are actually going to see any money? So the government said again, probably from the 25th of April onwards, they're hoping to make the first payments. I actually think it's going to take a lot longer. There's so many people, as James said, who are going to be on this scheme. Just physically trying to process all these payments is going to be a very difficult task. You would have also seen the guidance came out for self-employed people a couple of weeks ago. Actually, an indication there, they were told that self-employed people wouldn't be actually claim any money until June. For me, that's an indication that it's going to take a long time to actually get money back. And then obviously, in the meantime, as an employer, you're having to continue making those payments. Really important, you can claim back to the first day that employees are furloughed. So it's not when you first decided you might furlough people, which is an earlier stage. It's not at the point that you confirmed in writing that the people were furloughed, which is a later stage. It is the first day that you furlough people in practice. What the guidance says, very importantly, is that you do have to confirm in writing to all staff that they are furloughed. We'll come on to this later, but clearly it's very important to have a furlough letter which explains to employees that they are still employed, what's changed, what hasn't changed. Okay, we're going to come back to consent later because I know you've got a lot of questions on that, but you have to confirm it in writing. And really importantly, you have to keep that document for 5 years. And I mean, James and I have been speculating for a while now, but we are certain that there will be a future audit by HMRC. And 5 years is an indication by them that it's going to take them a lot of time to go back through and look at some of this. To what degree they're going to audit every single company, we don't know. And to what degree, if they find that companies are in breach, are they going to reclaim back the money where there's been breaches? Could there be penalties? Could there be interest? Could there be fines? We'll have to wait and see, but they will be auditing. Okay, so as I'm sure all you're doing is claim back in the spirit of the scheme and also follow the guidelines. James.
David, just to pick up on that. So interestingly, people, if you go on Twitter, you follow HMRC and they are responding to some queries. So I saw a tweet the other day from HMRC that said, so the portal opens 20th of April and I saw first of the payments will be made 30th of April, so 5 days later, which led to some speculation as to, is it a first come, first served? So you're there at whatever o'clock on the 20th, uploading, and that means you get paid out either on the 25th or the 30th. And if you're later on the 20th or on the 21st, that means you get paid. I have to say, I'm with David. I don't think many people are going to get paid out on the 25th. I think that employers are going to be funding both the March and April payroll runs, and it'll be only being reimbursed probably early May. So we shall see. One has to hope, and I don't know if anyone's heard anything about this, that it will not be manual entry uploading on into the portal. You've got to think it's got to be via some sort of spreadsheet, because otherwise the system is definitely going to crash.
Before we just move on to the next slide, could people, there are some sound quality issues, so could people who are not muted just please mute, because that just helps us all. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next slide. So James, what is it exactly that employers can recover?
Okay, so I touched on a bit of this earlier. So I get to a magic figure of 37.5K. What is that? Well, that's somebody who is earning 100% of what the government is going to pay 80% of. So 80% of 37,500, my math tells me, is 30K, but then I didn't do very well at school on maths, so if I've got that wrong, you can shout at me. What the government will therefore do is, if you earn 37.5 grand a year, they'll pay 80% of that, so that's 2.5K. If you earn more than that, it's capped at 2.5. If you earn less than that, it's the 80% of that. So that is what they'll give you by way of a grant. They will reimburse you the employer's national insurance to your 13.8% on that. And they will also give you the auto enrollment employer pension scheme, but that will be the minimum auto enrollment pension contribution that you would be paying. So for the majority of people, you'll be at 8%, so that's a 5% employee, 3% employer. If you are higher than that, some people are at 9%, some people go beyond that, then you will not get that back from the government. And it would make sense, and we'll come on to this later when we look at consent, to be agreeing with the employees that if I'm putting you on furlough, I'm dropping you down to the minimum auto-enrollment pension contributions. Because if you are in financial difficulties, you don't want to be making additional payments which you're not going to recover. You might choose to do so, of course, as the bottom of the slide says. You can choose to top up, but you don't have to. What else is included? Well, it's included stuff that you have to pay. So things like compulsory commission or compulsory overtime, you have to include that within the 2.5, but things that are not compulsory or contractual, so such as discretionary benefits in kind, are not included in what the government is going to reimburse. I've had a lot of clients say to me, what about car allowances? Is that covered? In my view, it is a regular payment, and the guidance says that if it's a regular payment, and therefore you contractually have to pay it, you can include it within the £2,500 cap, but that's my view. The guidance doesn't expressly say that. Just a quick word on top up. Top up is discretionary. If you do so, that's great. You are taking the employee back up to perhaps 100% or somewhere between 80 and 100%. Just have a think about, if you've got some employees in your workforce who are still working, who are therefore getting, say, 100%, but you then top up for your furloughed employees, query how that works out. I'm still working and I'm getting full pay. Those people are sitting at home getting nothing and are getting full pay. So you're doing great by your staff, but I think you need to manage that situation quite carefully. Okay, so David, can employees do any work whilst on furlough, and can you rotate staff, which sounds quite painful?
If we had £1, James, for every time we've been asked this in the last few weeks. So can employees work on furlough? Short answer, no. Government guidance is very clear about this, and they go as far as saying that employees can't provide any services on behalf of the company. They can't make any money on behalf of your organisation, or indeed any associated associations, so group companies, for example. So you have to be very clear with your employees about that. Government's positively encouraging people to do volunteer work and training as well. Volunteer work, for example, could be to go and support people in the NHS training. They are encouraging people to finish and continue with their training, but as long as it's not making money for the company. Okay. We've had lots of questions about keeping staff informed, and actually I've had some clients who've actually shut down system access or turned off emails. Quite draconian, but the thinking behind that is that those people they just know are going to carry on working and get themselves ready for when they are back up and running again. And of course, they're then concerned that when they may be audited, it will be just obvious that those people have been working and therefore they're in breach. So, but it's very important that actually this is a difficult time. It'll be an anxious time for people on furlough. So you must obviously keep the lines of communication open for you to decide how you do that with an organisation, having regular contact with people that we've placed on furlough. We've had to think about some things that we think won't constitute work. So if you've got ongoing disciplinary procedures, if people have grievances that are raised, then indeed we believe that that is not work. So you can continue to do that, and various forms of consultation. We'll come back on to collective consultation a little bit later. Furlough rotation is really, really important. So if, for example, you've got a group of 10 people all do the same job and they're all doing a little bit of work at the moment, say 20%, there's just not enough work to keep all of them occupied on a full-time basis. You have the ability to take 5 of them, place them on furlough, and there's a minimum period, remember, of 3 weeks, and then the other 5 continue to work for that 3-week period, and then at the end of the 3-week period you swap them, and you can continue to do that multiple times. That I know is working really well in practice already, and actually we'll mention this later. There's questions a lot of you asked about, well, how do you select people for furlough? You do have to beware discriminating against people how you select, but something like this would take all of that decision-making process away to some extent. So very, very useful. James, there's a couple of questions on chat that I think we might just answer at this point as well. The first question was, is it permissible to hire somebody whilst you have staff on furlough and change terms and conditions? The short answer is yes, but you would need very good justification for that. That would have to be in an area where you haven't got people with skills, because the first obvious point would be that you would try and keep busy within your organisation, and there would be some tension, wouldn't there, if you've got existing people on furlough and you see somebody being hired, there might be some questions to answer there. So as long as it's in an area of the business you just simply haven't got the skills already, then I think you could do that. And indeed some companies are quite busy in certain areas at the moment and they are hiring people, but other areas are being much more affected than others, so it is possible. The other question, perhaps, James, we could have a look at is HMRC says furlough scheme for companies where they are severely affected by COVID. How will they assess this? James, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be looking beyond the natural English interpretation of that. So severely affected is, well, you can't work, the business is shut down, or parts of the business have shut down. So that could be employees are unable to work because they've got kids at home, in which case you can put them on furlough. You've got people who are off sick, which we're going to come to in a minute, and potentially that enables you to put people on furlough. So severely affected is all we've got by way of guidance on that. I think that if you are therefore only mildly affected, I think, and you put people on furlough, you run the risk of HMRC coming along later and saying, aha, actually, we'll have that money back, please, because you weren't severely affected. So I think furlough with a bit of scepticism in that respect. Just on rotas, David, can I just pick up that point that you had there? James's cunning plan is that if I've got 10 people, but I've got work for 5, if I have to select which of the 5 I'm going to put on furlough, as David says, you've got to do that in a non-discriminatory and fair way. But if you are not going to top up from the cap, what you might want to do is have 5 in month 1 who are business working and getting 100% of the pay, 5 on furlough getting the cap, and then swap them round. So then month 2, the other 5 are getting the 100% because they're working, and therefore you are doling out in a fairer way so that people can get more money in, and that works. And it avoids as well issues of discrimination and selection.
Brilliant. So James, you mentioned sick pay. Now the guidance didn't have a lot in about sick pay in its first iteration. They had more in the second, and we had some changes over the weekend. We'd like to say a few words because I know there've been a lot of questions on that.
Yeah, I think this is a slightly tricksy area, and it's caused quite a lot of speculation as to what actually happened. I don't think it's entirely clear, but I've reached my conclusion on this, which is this: if somebody is temporarily short-term off sick, that doesn't mean that you should be putting them on furlough. That's not what furlough should be for. However, if you've got good business reasons, you can furlough staff on sick leave. Now, what the new guidance basically says is, hey, we've introduced, this is the government, a new SSP rebate. So SSP, as you all know, I'm sure, is paid on the 4th day of absence, so 3 waiting days. They've changed that so it kicks in on the 1st day and it goes for 2 weeks and you can get a rebate. What you can't do is, if you've got someone on furlough, drop them into being off sick and claim the rebate if you wanted to do so, and claim the furlough grant. It's one or the other. So what I take from all of that is that if I've got a situation where I put people on furlough and then they go sick, should you know, do you want to know, and I'll come back to that in a second, but if you do, then you are in a position where they can drop into SSP and you can claim the rebate for that, and they can stay on furlough, but you can't claim the furlough payment and claim the SSP rebate. So just to pick up on that point I said I'd come back to, a lot of you will have not just SSP for absent employees due to sickness, but you'll pay company or employer sick pay as well. So I've had various discussions with clients about this. So if you were in the situation where, for example, you pay 100% of sick pay for X weeks and say 50% for Y weeks, an employee will work out that actually they are better off being off sick to gain the company or employer sick pay than they are, because that will be paid at the 100%, say, than they are getting the cap under the furlough scheme. So they'll want to report to you when they're on furlough, hey, look, I'm now actually off sick and I'm really unwell. They won't get a GP sick certificate, obviously, but they might have broken their leg, as one of the people said in a question. If that's the case, they do need to report it, you need to record it. You can still claim under the furlough scheme, but you'll need to top up for that company's sick pay. I think we needed to have moved the slides on there, Simran, please. Thank you. So that's if they fall ill, reporting. In a sense, if you don't pay company sick pay, you didn't hear it from me, but do you really want to know whether they're off sick? Easier perhaps to just leave them on furlough and not ask too many questions. Depends whether you want to claim the rebate or not. Maternity leave is complicated. If you thought sickness was complicated, maternity leave is complicated. You've got a situation where if I'm on maternity leave now, or any other paternity, parental leave, all those other statutory leave, I'm just going to use maternity as the example, then I will get, say, SMP. I might get company enhanced SMP throughout that period. There's no need to put that person on furlough because they're absent out of the business anyway. But you can do so if you pay higher than SMP, you can claim through the furlough scheme for the additional payments. If somebody is on furlough and then goes on maternity leave, that's fine. They switch to maternity leave and they just sit there. Now, it seems to me that practically, if you look at maternity leave as the best example here, maternity leave maximum 12 months, of which 9 months is paid. So the first few weeks at the higher percentage, the rest of it at capped SMP. So but come week 39 of your maternity leave, you are no longer being paid. at that point, if the employee is sensible and it fits in with within this timescale, they'll give notice to you to say, I'd like to come back now, and then they can gain the benefit of the furlough grant rather than being off sick. But I think from memory, and David, you might know the answer to this, I think they have to give, is it 8 weeks notice to return early? So if they do that,
it's 8 weeks.
Yeah, the dates may not quite work because, you know, in theory, we might be out of this in 8 weeks. We'll come to that later. So if they wanted to try and gain the system now, they might be giving that notice now as they're coming up to the end of the paid period of maternity leave. I mentioned earlier, for shielded employees, yes, that was a tweak to the guidance 2 editions ago, where we now can put them on furlough, and same for employees with caring responsibilities. So as I said right at the start, this is wider than just, I don't have work for these employees. The government has significantly changed the ambit of the scheme. Okay, David, is an employee's consent required to be furloughed? Before we do that, can we go back to, sorry, apologies, you were just about to go there, weren't you? Can we do another poll, please, on consent? Which is just going to ask people about whether you have sought consent. Not that one, the other one. There we go. Who has actively sought consent to furlough changes to terms and conditions? We're going to come on to changes to T's and C's later, but as David will talk about, consent is key, but as we're hearing from the market, huge numbers of employers have just imposed and not sought consent. I'm going to guess that we'll probably not be able to get the results of that poll until we've asked the second one about collective consultation. So if that's the case,
yeah, I think that's probably right, isn't it? So
yeah, okay.
If we move on to the next slide. Yeah. So do employees have to consent to go on furlough? Short answer, yes. Guidance is very clear. You have to have your employees' agreement. So if you think about it, it's like any fundamental change to terms and conditions. Technically, you have to have a good reason, you will. Then you've got to make a proposal. You then consult with the employee with a view to obtaining their consent. James is right. I mean, anecdotally, we've heard that a lot of people have just simply been placed on furlough. The best way, the risk-free way is obviously to get people's consent. Then when you get consent, it's quite interesting. It would be helpful when you send the letter asking for consent that it's signed and returned. Obviously, that's quite difficult to do at the moment. So actually, just getting an email back, and then actually in some cases just getting a text back where that email's not possible, is absolutely fine. At the end of the day, this is about hearts and minds. We're in an unprecedented world. What we found in practice, if you actually explain to people that the business is at risk, we have to make some dramatic changes. We really do have to look at putting people on furlough. If you're clear with people, if you're transparent with people, if they understand the reasons why, then in our experience, people are signing up and are agreeing to go on to furlough. We'll talk a little bit later about what if people don't consent, but generally speaking, what we found is that people will consent to do that. As I said earlier, then have a very clear letter which explains how furlough applies. And we've already mentioned about how you select. I mean, it's a good point, the last one on the slide. Employment law hasn't changed, okay? Employment law applies in exactly the same way here. What we have is a completely new set of rules around furlough, which we are then applying employment law to. I think that then moves neatly on to.
Do you want to just deal with the poll results, David? Hang on.
There we got the results. Fantastic. So who's actively sought consent to furlough? 36%. So, and also to changes to terms and conditions. From my reading, tell me if you disagree, James, and 23% haven't sought consent. They've simply placed people on furlough.
No.
It's interesting. So I've got a number of clients that have done that, either because the numbers just mean it is sheer impossibility to gain consent. We've heard from a large employer that had 1,000 people just boom, put on furlough. Another employer went and did a hearts and minds approach and said, look, this is where we are, we can't operate, we can't trade, we'll look after you, and everyone was happy with that. So it depends. I think that the key bit here is for your high earners. Let's deal with that now, because let's deal with the impact of seeking consent and not seeking consent. If you don't seek consent, then there's obviously an employment claim there, and I'm sure most of you will be ahead of me on that, which is that it's an unlawful deduction from wages. I'm going to place you on furlough scheme by imposing that on you. That is a tribunal claim which you will lose because you have imposed their pay cut. In theory, it's constructive dismissal as well, but no one's going to resign over that because A, there's no jobs to go to, and B, they're better off remaining in the furlough scheme and getting some money rather than no money. And indeed, as we'll hear later on when we get to our tribunals still open, even if you are going to win an unlawful deduction from wages claim later, that is going to be much later, but I won't spoil David's slide there by saying too much more on that at this stage.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is as we come out of this scheme at some point, we don't know when yet, but in 2 or 3 months' time, people might be more confident as the world recovers of getting other jobs. And if we're still making changes, which we will be, then that might change. People might consider claiming constructive dismissal at that point potentially. But let's deal with that at that time. So shall we move on, James, to consultation, which is really important. And I know a lot of you have asked questions about that as well.
Yeah, poll first, please, on if you have gone into furlough. Can we put the poll up on whether you have actively engaged in collective consultation? I'll explain about collective consultation in a moment. So let's just let that run on in the background. So, I think we all know about collective consultation. So in a 30-second bullet, if an employer has a proposal to dismiss 20 or more employees at one establishment in a period of 90 days, collective consultation can be triggered, and that's a 30-day period, and if it's 100 or more, it's a 45-day period. So we know that law. That's under the Trade Union Labour Relations Consolidation Act. Okay, whatever. We know that the wider definition of redundancy doesn't just capture redundancies, it also captures when you are seeking to dismiss and re-engage in perhaps some other substantial reason process. So what we have then is a situation where if I'm seeking people's consent to place them on furlough, oh, here we go, 35% no, but 9% have yes. Okay, that's quite interesting. So some of you have, and let's talk about some of the implications of that and the implications of not having engaged in active collective consultation if it was required. If I seek consent and I don't disclose my hand as to what is going to happen if consent is not provided, our view is collective consultation is not going to be engaged. That's been our approach for years when looking at a situation where we are looking to make redundancies or looking to change terms and conditions. If you don't set out and file your HR1 and start with collective consultation and take a watching brief and see how many people say no, if you don't disclose that you will dismiss, you haven't got an active dismissal proposal. So here, if you just go and seek agreement to furlough, there's no active dismissal proposal, collective consultation is not imposed. If, however, you just impose it, arguably it may be engaged, or you're at higher risk of it being engaged. Now the problem here is the penalty, which is a punitive penalty for failing to properly inform and consult in collective consultation, and I'm guessing most of you will know what it is, but to spell it out, it is 13 weeks uncapped pay. That's a quarter of a year's payroll for all your affected employees. So not the furlough cap, not a week's pay cap, actual pay. That is horrendous in terms of a punitive award when businesses are really struggling. is our view that tribunals, whenever they hear this type of claim, if people bring it in the future, are going to side with poor employees who are disgruntled because they didn't get taken through collective consultation, or are they going to have sympathy with employers who are grappling with difficult issues? My view, it's the latter. There is something called a special circumstances defence, which we think might be available, but I'm not quite convinced by that. There's a legal argument that there's no protected pay award if employees are not dismissed and they remain in employment, which is quite interesting. But if you are advising businesses as HR directors or HR VPs or HR managers, whatever, on this, you need to say to the business, we ideally, as David has maintained, get consent. If we don't get consent and we seek to impose, or we do impose, there is a theoretical protective pay award risk which you need to advise the business on. The guidance makes it clear. There is a reference to collective consultation. If I was to get up on my soapbox, there you go, I would have said the government could have made this easier and have disapplied the collective consultation obligations in the in dealing with this. There is a coronavirus bill and that's gone through. They could have dealt with that. They haven't. They've just laid this reimbursement scheme on top of employment law. So we've got no changes to the actual law. We've just got guidance, which means we as employment lawyers are advising you of potential risks of the underlying employment law. So for those of you who have actively engaged, great. It's quite hard, as David talks about, actively dealing with collective consultation when all your employees are potentially at home. So that's quite difficult to do. And potentially 30 days before you can implement it. That's a very long period of time, but well done to those of you who have actively engaged. David, do you have anything else you want to say?
Well, just a quick question for you on the chat. What are the obligations of collective consultation with trade unions in regard to furlough?
Okay, so ordinarily you would have to engage with the trade unions for those people represented by the trade unions. Our view is trade unions shouldn't be running a flag up the pole, if that's the right phrase, of, oh, this is outrageous, you failed to engage in collective consultations, because trade unions were consulted with and agreed to the coronavirus job retention scheme. So it would be a U-turn, it would be hypocritical perhaps for trade unions to now be insisting that you undertake collective consultation when actually they were happy with how the scheme was put in place. Again, though, it does mention collective consultation in the guidance, which I think is unhelpful in that respect. Okay.
So if we move on to the next slide, so can employees be rehired? Again, lots of questions on this. You would have seen there's been quite a lot of talk about this. The scheme doesn't apply to employees employed after the 28th of February. So if you've got a new employee, it doesn't apply. If you go down to the last point on that slide, there was then a question about, well, actually, if you have employees post the 28th of February cheaping to your organisation, can you not furlough them? That was confirmed at the weekend. If people do cheapy after 28th, you can then place them on furlough. Okay, so that's been cleared up. Then I know a lot of people, we took lots of questions around before the furlough scheme was announced. So in early March, a lot of people had no choice but to start making people redundant, unfortunately. Where that is the case, you can retrospectively agree with those people that you made redundant to come back and you can furlough them. Okay. A little note of caution. Do think long and hard before you do that, because it may be that for very good commercial reasons that you had to furlough those people, and it may be that you think that your business might never recover to the extent that you would be looking to rehire those people. But in the circumstance where you know for sure that, or you're confident that things will pick up and you will want those really good people back, this is your opportunity where you can rehire and then bring them back onto the scheme. But again, you need to think that through, because you may have paid them statutory redundancy payments, you may have paid them in lieu of notice. And do you simply want to bring them back, put them on furlough, and then other employees think, well, hold it, these people have now benefited from that situation. Now, what you really ought to do is then reach an agreement with those people. So if they agree to come back, then what I would suggest is that they agree to repay back their statutory redundancy payment, for example. And you need to look at the practicalities of, did you pay in lieu of notice or not? Some might still be working out their notice at the moment. So quite a few things to think through there before you do that. A lot of people ask the question, well, what about people that have recently resigned? Can you bring them back and furlough? Well, you can, but my question would always be, if somebody's resigned, they've resigned for a reason, and the chances are they want to leave. So it may be that the new job they're lined up to go to has fallen through, so you may be feeling some degree sympathetic, but are you storing up problems? If they're working out their notice and you agree to rescind their resignation, they're an ongoing employee. So in 2 months' time, for example, are they going to resign again? Probably. Have you got a disengaged person? Will you want to dismiss, but they've got unfair dismissal rights, etc., that you need to be aware of? So are you actually storing up problems? So I would caution or think very carefully before you decide to take somebody back. Another common question is actually, well, if somebody's working out their notice, can we furlough them in any event? Technically, you can at the moment, but there's a more practical question. If somebody's working out their notice, they are receiving their full pay in most situations. So will they actually want to be furloughed and then receive a much lesser payment? So I've had this on a number of occasions already, and that is the type of situation where somebody's more likely not to consent to going on furlough.
Just to pick up on that, David, I have to say, if you've dismissed somebody for gross misconduct, there were probably very good reasons why you dismissed them for gross misconduct. To reiterate, there is no obligation to rehire them for the purposes of putting them on the furlough scheme. I would query whether you would really want to do that, to bring them back, but you might choose to do so. Equally, as David says, after they've made redundant or resigned, if you do bring them back, I would be very careful on the terms in which you bring them back. I'm not saying no more about that at the moment. I think you just need to think very carefully if you want to do this.
So just looking at time, James, we've got 10 minutes left. I think we'll spend the next 10 minutes looking at holidays and pensions, and the issue around second job, and perhaps a little bit around terms and conditions, although we've talked quite a bit about that already, a little bit about tribunals. So shall we move on and look at holidays and pensions?
Yeah, let's do this relatively quickly. Government still hasn't given any view on holidays, which is, I won't swear, very frustrating. So this is our view based on where we are. ACAS has changed its position here. So our view is employees can elect to take holiday. Employers can force employees to take holiday during furlough. The employees will continue to accrue holiday during furlough. If you are going to force employees to take holiday, then you need to give them double the amount of notice then you need them to take. So if you want to take a week's holiday, you need to give them 2 weeks holiday. Our view is that if employees are taking holiday during furlough, they still get the benefit of the furlough scheme, and the employer still gets the benefit of the grant, but the employer has to top up to their normal pay, so essentially 100%. So for a while, we were concerned that holiday and furlough were mutually exclusive states. That's fancy words for you can't be on them both at the same time, and it has to be one or the other. My view is that actually, sorry, I've got somebody who's trying to, let me get rid of that. Thank you. So our view is that actually we are in a position where if you are on furlough, you can take holiday. Previously, the view was you would furlough somebody for 3 weeks, then they'd take a week's holiday, then you put them back on furlough. Yes, that's completely risk averse, no chance of HMRC later coming back under its scrutiny procedures, as David has alluded to say, you can't get the grant rather on holiday. Our view is that doesn't work, because if you furlough them for 3 weeks and then put them on holiday for a week, you are paying 100% of the holiday pay costs at that point, which is a bad idea. Okay, so if we then look at, sorry, I do apologize.
I think we lost James. Just while James is sorting himself out, we'll come back to annual leave. Can we just move on to the next slide, Mark? Can a furloughed worker have a second job? Let me deal with James. You back, or shall I do this other slide?
I'm back. Sorry, that all went a bit
okay,
wrong at
off
that
you
point. But, so the last bit was pension, complicated arrangements on the pension. I've talked about auto enrolment. If you are in salary sacrifice, if you operate salary sacrifice, the government has confirmed that it can be a life event. The employee can come out of salary sacrifice, and therefore you are in a position where the employee can get more money. Why are they going to get more money? Because if you're in salary sacrifice, there's something called reference salary and something called adjusted salary. So if I'm earning 30 grand a year, that is my reference salary. If I'm in salary sacrifice, I'll be in, say, 28,000. The reason I'm doing that is my employer pays a greater employer pension contribution. If you go into furlough, they're going to get 80% of the adjusted salary, the lower salary. That's bad for the employee and bad for the employer, because it's still going to have to make the large employer pension contribution and only get 3% back of the adjusted salary from the government. So provided you do not encourage employees, you may be able to get them to see the light and work out they're better off coming out of salary sacrifice. And there is another knock on, they might want to opt out of auto enrolment as well. Be careful here, you need to do this with a lot of care, because actually they will be better off and the employer potentially will be better off. It's only for a short period of time. If you're trying to maximize income into those households, that is something to look at. But bear in mind, if you're in salary sacrifice, the cap applies to adjusted, not reference. David. Second jobs.
Let's just look at second jobs again. The short answer is yes. If people have got a second job, they could be furloughed from one, work in the other. They could be furloughed on both. That's absolutely fine. Where possibly more of a question mark is around if in your contract of employment, employees are not allowed to have a second job. Okay, and there could be good reasons for that. You don't want them to go off and work for a competitor at the same time, or you want full commitment to you in your job. So the question is, well, if they then say, I'm on furlough, can I go and work elsewhere? We take the view that you could say yes, but with the normal caveat, you want to know where they're working. So if they're going to work in Tesco's, top up their pay, absolutely fine. But obviously, you might want them back at work. You might have an uptick in work in 3 weeks' time. So make sure that they are ready and available. So that is fairly straightforward. James, I think we're just going to go straight past your next slide, and just if we move Mark just to because of time, and we talked about it already. Just where are we with employment tribunals? Are they still open? So final point this morning, really, before I hand back to Mark. Yes, they are, but they are creaking, and they're creaking because they've got a lot of people, unfortunately, being ill. They are under-resourced. So any final hearings have already been postponed for a period of time. So I have one for I think it was the 5th and 6th of April. They're converting all final hearings into short case management hearings, and they are struggling really to let you know. So on the Friday before, we were told at 4:20 in the afternoon that it wasn't going ahead on the Monday. On the Monday, we were then told in the afternoon that the telephone call was going to come on the Tuesday, and literally the judge called us on the Tuesday afternoon, and basically we're talking about rescheduling the hearings. And it does depend on the different tribunals. Some have more resources than others, but We're expecting quite a few claims which actually to come out of what we've been talking about today. The reality is that those claims may not be heard for at least a year because of resources. So delays are inevitable. And if you've got ongoing tribunal claims, what you'll find is that you won't get too much communication from the tribunals at the moment, but you just have to do your best. Mark,
David,
I think we've covered a lot of ground there. Sorry.
All right, David, I was just going to say, ACAS told me this morning 2 years for an unfair dismissal claim from now.
Wow.
Which is, you know, is that justice? I'm not convinced.
Mark, back to you, I think. You're muted, Mark. There you go.
Superb, and I think we've managed to work through it in a very technologically savvy way between the three of us. I'm very pleased. Well done. So I just wanted to just thank everybody. Loads of food for thought. I mean, the goalposts are going to continue to change. There's going to be some terms and conditions that do continue to change as well. The trend seems to have been over the weekend, which I think is keeping our legal friends busy, David and James. So I just wanted to thank everybody. You know, it's been a really, really good, useful hour. You know, it certainly enables us to broaden our understandings. From a recruitment perspective, you know, we of course have got people that are on sort of offer periods at the moment that are waiting to go through their notice periods. And I guess this is where I could just recommend use your recruiters. And if these offers are still going to go through, you're wanting to put them on hold, I think the most important thing here is just really effective and transparent communication, because it's a really vulnerable time, of course, for everybody. I'd say probably 90% of the offers that we had before this all happens, that are on sort of 3 months, are still happening. It's just now a case of just assessing what's going to be going on. So again, use your recruiters and use them really well. So the next webinar that we have is going to be next Wednesday. So I guess leading on from this one, you know, emotional well-being and employee well-being is really, really important, as you just mentioned. So we've got one next week, which is looking at emotional health of your employees. So it could feed in quite nicely here. And yeah, we'll make sure that everybody has got an invitation to that one as well. It'd be good to see some more places. I'll have a conversation with both David and James after this, because I think we've had, there's going to be so much content here, and there's going to be lots of things that you guys, I'm sure, are still going to want to understand better. So I think a continuation of this series would be a good idea. And I think we'll have a further conversation maybe in the next fortnight or so about getting another one out. But again, we'll send a feedback email after this. So on there, please, if we haven't picked anything up from the chat and you're wanting to find out anything further, any ideas on other topics, again, away from this as well, we'd be really interested. We want to shape this around what is interesting for you at the moment, what is causing you challenges. So we want to make sure it's relevant to the market. We do have, and on this email, there'll be a couple of other things, just really quickly. There's a HR group that we've got set up on LinkedIn. We'll get everybody an invitation to that group. And what we're finding is it's going to be used now, and the feedback has been great, you know, from a webinar we did last week, to give people an opportunity to chat amongst their peers. You know, things that are going to go on in the marketplace, you know, your peers out there may be addressing these issues. And this could be anything, you know, it could be employment law related, it could be onboarding related, you know, this could be recruitment related, whatever it might be. But we're going to open that up and let you join that forum as well. The last thing to really sort of say here, I guess, is just really to kind of thank David and James. You know, valuable time. I know you guys are extremely busy at the moment, and again, you know, affected by this as we all are, working from home and doing the best of it. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. It's been really good, and thank you to everyone here for attending. You know, yeah, would love to see you again on another one of these, and please come back with some feedback. It would be really good to hear back from you. Anything, James?
Could I just say, just sort of a final point, if people are interested on any topic, not just employment law, go to our website. We have an enormous portal there about government schemes, anything like that. So affecting any areas of your business, that's just a little useful resource if people are interested.
Yeah, we can make sure there's a link over to your website as well. And again, if there's any questions that are legal related that you want to fire them back over to David and James specifically, or anything recruitment related, it doesn't have to be you're recruiting right now, but anything that is going to be a challenge in this marketplace for you guys, please, by all means, more than happy to answer any questions that come through. So thank you very much. Yeah, stay safe and well, and we'll see you all soon, I hope. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Bye.